I'm Susan Greene, and I work at Collab along with several of the people you've just met, the Colorado News Collaborative. And I am, I'm a newspaper person. I come in peace, and uh, now work with newspaper people and other people on some deep dive journalism, collaborative journalism. We're Some of you were in the workshop that Tina Grego and I did an hour ago on interviewing, and we're going to have a little overlap on that. But what I really want to do is just like rattle off a couple. It's 10 fairly quick tips on building sources, and really have most of this session just be conversation, because I, for one, am sick of hearing myself talk. And I think these are just so much better when they're conversations about what works, what some of us struggle with, etc. So that's why I asked you to keep your videos on, so we can really have a conversation. And forgive me, but I'm going to do like a little reading through this list. So, and then we'll get to more sort of interaction. So this is not just for, reporters. It's also it applies to visual journalists and editors. We can be super talented. We can have the best instincts. We could be the most magnificent writers, or work data like champs, have the best podcast voices, but none of that really means much if without great sources. And I really want to emphasize that, this is, again, not just for reporters, but for visual journalists and editors as well, anyone working in the newsroom. I think most of us have been in the business long enough to know that, we see some journalists sort of toss away sources, kind of like, empty beer bottles. And we're here this morning to sort of discuss easy ways you can do the opposite, sort of recycle sources, cultivate them, ultimately benefit from those relationships for years, and really not see them as, or treat them as one-offs. So my 10 tips: remember that everyone's a source, not just like the obvious people, like the elected officials that you're supposed to cover, or other people in power, but, in that realm, their assistants, their the people in their districts, the people who knew them way back then, the people who bankroll them or whose advice they seek, the people seeking to run against them. Remember that your neighbors can be sources, your kids' teachers, your hair person, your phlebotomist, the woman waiting with you in the DMV line, the guy next to you on a plane or a wedding reception. News happens to all of us, and, directly or indirectly in one way or another. And so I think we should just remember that everyone is a potential news source, just to keep your antennas up. Rule number 2, don't be a schmuck. And this applies to general life, not just news gathering, but keep in mind things like ethics and basic human decency, stuff like not exploiting or people if they're in trauma, or if they're mentally ill, or they're a child, or English is not their primary language. Don't skulk around, be transparent about your work. Always remember to treat people who are unsophisticated in the ways of news gathering and news delivery. There's a certain education that goes along. We're sort of ethically compelled to be, maybe give some people a break once in a while if they really don't know how this works, or haven't really thought out, that what they're about to say to you is going to not just, be thrust in front of like their whole community, but kind of live forever on the internet. And that said, remember, these are just really basic things I'm sure you all know, but, if someone is an elected official or knows how it works and is paid to represent all of us or work in the public behalf, I think you cut them less of a break. So that kind of goes to that adage, afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. But I think you're supposed to say it the other way around. Tell them how you work. Always share ways that you can, and brainstorm ways that you can protect their identities. If it's appropriate, maybe tell them who you're interviewing, tell them what documents you're trying to get or you have, when the story might run. More often than not, that transparency will put them to work for you beyond just the interview. If you're seeking a document, they may know how to get it or hook you up with someone who can. And so being, as transparent as you can is not just about like combating the skulking around, reputation that some reporters have, even if it's unwarranted. It's just, you really have to like work to prove that you're not doing that. A big one is think about who's working whom. For people in positions of power, people who know what you do, you're a journalist, and are semi-sophisticated about those things, don't assume that they forget that for even a minute, that you're a journalist. And remember that they're often telling you things for reason. So constantly ask yourself, what is that reason? What's their agenda? And remember that it's often the case that they're trying to work you rather than you working them. That said, someone having an agenda shouldn't disqualify them as a source. So I was talking to Angie, who is one of our lobbyists at CPA, and she's at the State House every day, and she was saying that there are a ton of reporters in Colorado State House, and that most of them, she says, don't work the lobby. They don't have relationships with the lobbyists, and I'm sure that's because they just assume, oh, these people have agendas and blah blah blah. And of course they have agendas, like, of course, that doesn't mean that they don't have valuable information that you might need. Often those are the people who really are much more knowledgeable about what's going on than even some of the lawmakers. And they're also people, they also care about things and have lives of their own and stuff. And so don't rule out just because someone has an agenda, don't not cultivate a source with them. Just be mindful of what that agenda is, and kind of remember that this is a big one. These are not your friends, your sources. Generally, they're this is a sort of arrangement, and that you may have at this moment or this point in your lives, they sort of intersect for maybe in common ways, even though you have one agenda that you might think is a little bit more pure than theirs. Work that. And then tip number 5, I call imposter syndrome. And I want to say, if the expression work a source makes you cringe, or you feel like you're stealing people's souls by cultivating them as sources, or you might be in the wrong business. For the most part, the people we interview want their stories or their sides of stories told. They're flattered and honored by and feel respected, for knowing something that people want to hear or learn from. And it's your job to figure out ways into those people and to draw them out. And if you're shy or antisocial, or if you feel like you're prying or doing something wrong or dishonorable by cultivating those relationships with those people, again, you may be in the wrong business. And I say that because there's too few of working reporters for any of us not to be tilling the soil of our sources and our beats often and hard. A reminder, it's probably obvious, but do no harm or minimize harm. If you burn a source, you've not just burned him or her, you've also burned yourself, because anyone that source knows who may ask him or her whether to trust you with another story will hear a big no. Don't go near that person. In a business in which trust and connections are everything, it's just foolish not to mention unprofessional and unethical to do harm to people who give you information. As I said in the interview session, the art of the interview, nobody owes you information. I mean, except under like sunshine and freedom of information laws. They're talking to you, and no matter what their agenda, you're taking from them. So remember that you have, a responsibility to obviously be civil to them, but, often to protect them. One of our members on the call this morning was talking about protecting the location of a Dominion voting booth executive because his life was being threatened after the election, and wondered if that was ethical. And it absolutely is ethical. You have no obligation to your readers to report where that person is hiding out because he's at risk. So you really obviously this goes back to don't be a schmuck, just try to minimize the harm. And there's sometimes these are ethically kind of blurry questions, so there's no shame in asking for advice in your newsroom, or if you ever want to come to us at Collab, we're more than happy to be sounding boards. Tip 7, stay put. You may be working your way up from smaller newspaper or news outlet to bigger ones, moving every couple of years. That's how I did it in my youth, and many of us in my generation did it. And at some point I realized, and I think many of us do, that you gotta stay put for a while to really eat the fruits of your labor. And I mean, not to mention the like personal toll it takes on your personal life to keep moving and moving, but sources are not, that's what we have, our Rolodex and our relationships with people who give us information. And so, you plant those seeds with every interview you do, and, you want to get to a point in your career where if something happens, I know John Ferrugia, who's on this line today, was talking about when the Aurora shooting happened. He just happened to have so many sources in Aurora that within a couple hours, he knew far more than anybody else. That's because he had cultivated and spent the time to cultivate sources over many years of living and working here. I want to sort of say about PIOs, public information people or spokespeople, that I just want to I want to acknowledge that there's a temptation, given our lack of resources and time pressures, to, take press releases or what PIOs tell us and make news stories out of them. A story is not done right if the only source is a spokesperson or PIO or a news release. And as cynical as this may sound, my strong sense is that many of these people are now turning out to hinder rather than help the free flow of information. So as it pertains to your relationships with PIOs, you don't want to piss them off, but you don't want to rely on them either. And preferably you don't want them hanging around during your interview with the people that they work for. Tip 8, show up in person, get to know people in their natural habitat. It means something if you make the effort to make the trip. Meet for lunch, meet for drinks, make sure you're paying, they're not paying. We're all coming out of holes right now because of the pandemic. Many of these people we haven't seen in more than a year. Take the time to go to lunch with them or reconnect in person. It's worth it. And like, just acknowledge, hey, talk about something other than like the work at hand. Like, we're all humans, and how's this been for you? How are you doing? Oops, sorry guys. That seems kind of obvious, but, and it takes some time, but totally worth it. As I said in the art of the interview this morning, start with humility, make yourself small, put people in a position of knowledge. Some people advocate the kind of playing dumb tactic with people. I'm not big into that. I think people can smell if you're bullshitting. It works for some people, doesn't work for me. I would just say, again, make yourself vulnerable enough to say like, I need you to teach me about this thing, or I know nothing about it. Can you start at the beginning? And that takes a kind of vulnerability that some reporters are not comfortable with, but I think it always works. Make yourself available in the evenings and on weekends, because lots of people can't talk during the workday, especially if they're blowing the whistle. People really appreciate you making that time. And then always follow up, asking what the reaction to the story was. So, um, I think there's like a bit of a post-mortem that has to be done. And it's really illuminating to hear what people in that source's world are saying about the story. It's helpful for you, and it connects you with the source. And then tip 10, lighten up. Let them see you as a person, not a cyborg. Again, these aren't friendships, but if you do what my tip number 7 says, and stay put, and you live in a place long enough, and even if you're bouncing around on beats and stuff, you're connected to these people. Your kids may go to school with them. They may be your neighbors, and so like you owe it to yourself, and your own work in source development to sort of lighten up, and you owe it to the whole industry, because like I think you've read the polls, people aren't so big into journalists lately and don't really understand what we do and think we're kind of scummy. So just try to like be a little, I think sometimes people get really stiff with sources, and there's no reason to do that. So those were my 10 tips. It's 11:22. What I'd really love is just to have a discussion. Let me quickly look in the chat. Oh, that's a personal note. So let's have a discussion about, what's working with you guys when you develop sources. What are things you learn along the way? What are some challenges or problems you have with those relationships, or ethical questions, or no question is silly or too like obvious to discuss here. So bring it on. I know you have them.
So I kind of have more of an advice question, and I guess it's kind of like a challenge. So I am still in college, and hopefully by the next May, I will be graduating with a journalism degree. But I know, thank you. But I know going into the field, I'm going to be a young person, right? So I guess like I'm worried about keeping sources if like they might feel more inclined to talk to a more seasoned journalist who might have more credibility. So I guess my advice for that is like, how do I show my sources that I'm credible enough for them to want to stay my source?
Okay, you're going to be a great journalist, because that's a fantastic question. And I wish I had asked that question when I was younger. I remember my first newspaper job in the middle of the Mojave Desert in California. I was covering a town, and within like a week, I had written a story that was a little bit critical of, I guess, the mayor. And we were an afternoon paper, so our deadline was at 8 o'clock in the morning. So we'd get there really like at dark. It was still dark, and we were like bleary. And this mayor comes in, and I'm Jewish, and for some reason he knew I was Jewish, and so he came in to like essentially tell me he wanted to save my soul. And I had written something kind of critical, and so clearly, like as a non-Christian and someone critical, took a bit of a different look of what they were doing in his city. My soul needed saving, which he never would have done if I were like me now, right? Like I really don't think that he would have done that. And so I think that is kind of like your countenance, Ashley. It's about your countenance. Like uh, you look them in the eye, you do excellent work that is unassailable ethically and factually. And you have to, in your actual work, make them respect you, right? They may not like you. They may not like what you're doing or the questions you're asking, but you have to make them respect you. And that is just in everything from, again, eye contact, to the quality of your work, to, not when whatever happens to, like, the mayor coming in to save your soul, that you don't like cower to that, that you keep your space, and that you kind of let them know, yeah, that's sort of not going to work for me, Mr. Mayor. And so you know if you have to read some sort of self-help book on, like, uh commanding respect, I think it's like pornography. You know it when you see it or when you do it, and you know what you respect in people. And so sort of like emulate that and hold your ground, and um you know uh work harder. I mean, that's another thing. Just work harder than the person who's 10, 15, 20, 40 years older than you. Like, it may be they have kids and at home, and like all manner of other responsibilities, and maybe you're a little bit more free because you are so young and haven't had kids yet or whatever. And so, like, all of those are advantages that you can use to develop the kind of respect, or command it, that you would need to counter that. But I love that question. And don't be don't be the person they feel like they can flick around. Okay.
I might just add to you there that there's no substitute for personal contact. Many people that I've been dealing with in my just previous jobs, a lot of people seem to think that they can email someone or email them and strike up a relationship, or just call somebody on the phone occasionally or whatever. There is no substitute for personal contact. If somebody knows you, knows your values, knows how you work, and you're willing to express that to them in terms of, this is the way I work, this is what I think, these are my values, these are my editorial values, you strike a personal relationship. Even if they don't like you, or they don't want to help you, they can't ignore you, because you're there in person. And the toughest thing for anybody to do is not to talk to somebody who's sitting in their office waiting for them. It's a hard thing to avoid them. It's a hard thing to say, I'm not talking to you. Yeah. They will talk to you. And so personal contact for me has always been paramount.
Yeah, and that's true not just in source building, but when you're looking for a job in a year after you graduate, knock on wood. What do editors look for in a reporter, any reporter? Persistence, right? And so, be a little bit of a nudge, whether you're trying to get a job or you're trying to work a source. Persistence goes a long way, and that's what we want to see people do working sources. So that's sort of some of the same qualities that you should do when trying to get hired as well.
Well, thank you. I will be taking this with me, and hopefully I will actually be able to do in-person stuff soon.
Yay. Yes. Keep at it. We need you. All right. Who else?
I'll jump in. I've been thinking a lot recently. I've been in my current location about 4 years, and I do have quite a few unofficial sources that I go to regularly. But it seems like I keep going back to some of the same people, and the same people keep calling me. And I really wanted to really start diversifying who I have in my stories. And I especially thought about this the other morning when we were talking about race and reporting, that I don't really want to only be talking to people of color when we're talking about racism, or we're talking about DACA or things like that. I'd like to see more diverse faces in our publication about positive things, public service, and things like that. And I would like to hear everybody's views about what they do to diversify their source pool.
Anyone want to respond to that? Laura.
Yeah, this is a great topic, Christina. Thanks for bringing it up. And I think one of the things you can think about when you're thinking about sources, there are people who are in the crosshairs of information, right? They're getting it, they're receiving it, they're sending it out. And probably if you looked at those people you just mentioned who you're going back to over and over again, and the kinds of positions they're in, maybe they're, the secretary of a board of directors, or they're, in the mayor's office, or whatever they are, a doctor, a teacher, or whatever. Could you then purposely find people of color who are in similar positions? So instead of calling that same person over and over again, you start to develop people who have similar levels of information, but who are more diverse, and just maybe try it as a purposeful thing to diversify your kind of go-to source list. And then another thing I would recommend is, where are you? I'm sorry, I know you've said it before in other sessions.
I'm in Hayes, Kansas. We have a population about 20,000, and they reminded me when we were looking at census data yesterday afternoon, we're 92% white.
Yeah.
So we are a very homogeneous population here for the most part.
So a challenge. I know Hayes. I've been through and to Hayes many times. So maybe there are some organizations, or it's going to be harder for you because you're dealing with 8% of your population that you're trying to find, but just really purposefully trying to seek out those folks, because I'm guessing they may have, because everybody does, internal networks. So one of the great things about building sources is getting into those kind of existing networks, because once you're connected to one of them, then you have kind of access to the entire network. So it may be the parent-teacher organization or the Farm Bureau or whatever it is, but figuring out what those kind of pathways for ways that information gets shared informally in your communities, and inserting yourself in those pathways is a great technique.
Yeah, I love that. That's great advice. Kara Wertheimer, thank you for adding into the chat the NPR Diverse Sources database, which is really helpful. I've used that. And, what did you say? What percentage is white? 90?
Well, 92% as of 2010. We do have a state university here, so that's probably not counting some of the students that live here at least 9 months of the year. But yeah.
Yeah. My answer to that would be, I think the database is great. I think what Laura's saying, calling organizations and really trying, not just on deadline, right? But in advance, because you're aware already, consciously that you need to do this. I would just say in your real life, right? When in your community, you are encountering people of color, that I'm pretty chatty and social. And so it's easy for me. And I know that not everybody is like this, but it's you can easily strike up a conversation with someone like that, and you can easily keep in touch, and I would say that more lasting sort of relationship will be ultimately more fruitful, because it's not really, it's not a one-off. Not to say that if you connected with someone on NPR, the diverse sources database, or what Laura's saying, you're connecting by phone. It's always, this is back to my interviewing thing I did with Tina this morning, but if you've met someone face to face, right, that's 10 times deeper than connecting with them on the phone, right? Chances are they're going to remember you, you're going to remember them. And so I would say like not on deadline, not when you're frantic, but like, make a goal for yourself. Like every week I'm gonna, or, every month I'm gonna try to, meet people. Maybe you're like at the local, Japanese or Chinese restaurant, and like, what's that experience like? And I think people are like, you might feel like that's awkward because, oh, I'm meeting them and I'm just talking to them about their race. But like, this is something that you're dealing with living in your completely homogenized community every day. Like I imagine most people are pretty comfortable talking about it. And so, look at your own friends. Are all your friends white? Like, they may be, and maybe we have to all think about that, whether we're, journalists or not. And so, like just deliberately make that extra step to reach out. Does anyone else have some suggestions about this? Such a good question. All right, let's move on. What else you got? Come on.
I had a suggestion.
Oh, good.
Well, and I don't know if it's a suggestion or maybe just an idea, but as you two were exchanging ideas, I was thinking about a story I wrote recently where I realized I had a knowledge deficit of my own, that part of the story was connected to a person with disabilities who wasn't being served appropriately by city government. And so now I'm reflecting on that story and thinking I really should spend the next week or two filling that deficit of knowledge with some information, and just spend some time understanding kind of where I could learn, and who I might be able to connect with. And perhaps as a result of spending some time doing that, I might have an additional source or two.
Yeah.
So that's,
is your name Catherine?
sorry, it's Catherine.
Yeah, Catherine. What Catherine says reminds me of, people see that, they remember that, like, that you've taken that extra time, right? And so, if you, were on the phone with sources and they saw in your work that you really heard what they said, right? Then they're going to remember it and they're going to be more apt to come to you when there's a breaking story, right? That happened to me with a story, and I was sort of talking to like a lawyer who worked in a law office that specialized in disability law. And then like they liked the way I did the story, and then it turns out, although she was able-bodied, members of her family had disabilities. And so when stuff happened with them, which was actually kind of big news, she connected me with them. And then I think, because we're talking about building sources here, it's always like a daisy chaining, you know what I mean? You're always sort of, I've been doing this so long that like, sometimes I forget how I met people or whatever, but it's generally that kind of, one source leads to another source, and they're connecting you, and you're always asking them, who should I talk to? Who has stories like this? And I would really ask yourself, I love this point you're making about, I'm going to make a point and go and learn this stuff, right? And I think we as journalists should like always be asking ourselves after certain stories, who did I meet in the course of reporting that story? And did I follow through with them after it ran to get their input, or, because nobody has just like one story inside of them. Everybody, we're like, people are thinking all the time, and they're frustrated because, the media is not covering their issue. And you have to be the answer to that. You're like the solution. You are the savior. Like, you can solve their problems by being interested. And there's so much gratitude that comes with that, this thing becomes so easy, this source development thing. So yeah. All right, who else? Has anyone experienced that, like, oh, I've become friends with my source, or my friend has become my source? awkwardness that I'm pretty sure all of us have experienced. So let's admit it. Any anecdotes? You know, you don't want to be like the mom at preschool who's like trolling, you know, for news stories at like cupcake hour. You don't want to be that. But there's nothing wrong with, you know, someone brings something up about what's happening in their life to say, hey, you know, I'm a reporter or I'm a journalist. Would you mind talking to me about that later or connecting me with someone who knows about it? I don't think that there's anything predatory about that. I don't think anyone ever really feels put off by it. I think generally they'll think, oh, well, that must be interesting that you get to like just ask questions all the time, which is our great privilege in this job that we do. And so if that feels sort of icky to you, you might want to rethink that, you know?
Yeah, I like that part. You know, if they don't know it, ask somebody who does. It's just like, you know, I needed something fixed on my car, and my best mechanic couldn't do it. He was too busy. Hey, you know somebody else, because everybody knows somebody else. So hey, just, you know, push it along. Hey, is there somebody else? It's all building relationships and moving along. But one thing I did like, if I can yap for just a minute here, since I fill the radio silence. That stay put, stay for a while. That is really, really important. I think everybody here is local journalist and in your local community. And that's what I just love. I mean, if they know you're local, and even if they don't know you, here's what I found, a good little trick, you know, reference something that's local, like, hey, remember 6 years ago when the park flooded with all that rainwater? And they go, oh, yeah, I remember that. And you establish a little bit of cred there, you know, that you got, hey, you know, this person is from around here. Or when you leave your phone number, here's another little trick. Always leave your local area code if you have a local area code, so they know, oh, it's not somebody, you know, from out of state. And I cannot, and having been in this business for a long time, I can't believe what a crummy job or horrible thing the national journalists have done, especially the political ones, for local journalists. I mean, they have really flipped this profession and made us a hated group. And I come on the side of the local people and I just say, yeah, you know, I can't stand those DC East Coast elitist journalists any more than you. And I can't, because a lot of them have really done bad things. And I'll go on the record as saying that, you know, I can't believe somebody at the New York Times would make up a story or be factually incorrect, you know. So I say, yeah, no, I'm a local, you know, and that has really gone a long way. You know, I'm on your side because anyway, I'm just ranting a little bit. But once they find out you're there and you're part of there and you're part of the community and you know the community and you know some people, boy, that just gives you the leg up.
Yeah, I love that you said that. You know, I think just as people can smell inauthenticity,
Oh yeah,
they can smell if you care, right? And if you're covering your community, you do care. And you know, they can see that in you. They can sense it from your questions, and there's really nothing wrong with caring, right? Obviously,
right.
you need to be fair in your story. You need to sort of cover both sides of it, but you know, I think I've definitely worked with some people who felt ashamed of like that caring thing, or felt that they needed to hide it for professional reasons.
Yeah.
So this is from Christina Janney. I think when you live in a small community, your life is going to intersect with your sources in a lot of ways. You may go to church together, be in community groups together. It can be harder to separate professional and personal lives. Absolutely. You know, I did a session yesterday with two journalists on collaborative stories we wrote about their rather small communities. And I was like the outsider and they were the local people. And I kept hearing over and over again, you don't have to live here. You don't have to live here. And there's
Yeah.
so many webs and entanglements, like, how awkward if you're the reporter and you're writing about like a pretty bad cop who like lives next to your mom or something. And that kind of gets back to Ashley's question about, being a young reporter or being respected. And it's like, again, this may sound kind of woo-woo, but plant your feet firmly in the ground, and you let it be known that this is not personal, this is professional. You have to write this story. Don't feel shame about it. What you're doing is still what we do. Maybe we all need to hear this. What we do is honorable, right? And
Well, yeah.
like, don't forget that. Don't let that slip through the hole in your pocket. And so, you have to so develop a thick skin in this job where, you get used to people kind of being pissed off at you sometimes. But I moved to Colorado to cover the city and county of Denver, and that's when the Denver Post had 2 or 3 reporters covering it, and the Rocky Mountain News had 2 or 3 reporters covering City Hall, and there were always like a good cop and a bad cop, and I've always my whole career been the bad cop. And there was a city council, and I'm pretty sure like all of those council members kind of hated me at certain times, right? But years later, when I went on to run a nonprofit, I think every one of those council members supported us. And, because we had interactions where we sort of, agreed to keep it civil and professional, and they knew it wasn't personal, and I was just doing their job. And some days they don't like it, and some days they loved it, and they remembered that. So you kind of, again, there's a lot of shame thrown out at reporters lately, from Washington and from all over. And we don't
but here, here's the deal. You're local. They know you, and I don't have a problem with them seeing in the supermarket. And I'm real easy to reach. And I know when I first started my last job, and the publisher goes, "Well, do you want to put your cell phone number on the business card?" I go, "Damn right. You're damn right. Put my cell phone number. Put my email on every story. They know where you have a problem. Come by, talk to me. They know who I am." And that's the thing too. And these national journalists, and I see some just a complete error of fact or a fib in a story, and I email them, zip, nothing. They never get back to you. There's no phone number, or if you get an email, and they won't return it. They never do. They live in a ivory tower. If you're a local journalist, you're right on the street, and they're there's a sign, and they can stop by. And I've had some people stop by. One crazy guy stopped by and lifted his shirt up and showed me his scars, but to prove something about this crazy story. So there are some that you go like, okay, maybe this is a little bit marginal, but that comes with the territory. But be easy to reach. I mean, they really appreciate that, and they know that hey, you're okay. But what did Christina say? Oh, I just say, yeah, you can't call after 10.
Oh yeah, Christina
Yeah.
said, I get.
Yeah, I'm not going to work. I'm not going to take your call at 2. Just put it in voicemail.
Yeah, it's a blessing and a curse. I agree with you, Christina. I mean, even when I worked at the Post, and I always had a policy kind of like David's, like call me whenever, and that was like
Almost whenever.
Yeah, that was a statewide newspaper. What I actually always have had is a Google number. It's like a free number. It rings on your cell phone, and if someone's calling that number, that's like a work-related call, and you can decide whether to take it or not. That's a trick. But again, like, some people are they're so angry, and they expect that they're going to leave like a message or an email, and that you're not going to respond to it. Like that's the story they tell themselves, in their heads. And when you do respond, it's like, it goes so far, or you do pick up the phone. And again, like, this is so case by case. I mean, you know, my colleague at CoLab, Tina Griego, has much clearer, bigger boundaries than I do around these things. You know, and my kids have definitely grown up with like the phone ringing with news tips, you know, and in some ways I'm sure I will regret that. But in some ways it's just helped me do my job. It's just my way of doing it, and it has worked for me. What else you got? Come on. Yeah, go ahead.
I have another question. I just recently started writing on the crime beat, and I'm hoping to get some tips about how to collect sources outside of law enforcement and the judicial system.
That's such a good question. You know what I said about the press release thing? Like, if you're the press, you know, if your story, the only source in it is the press release or the PIO, you're not doing it right. That's such a good question. And that's such a hard thing, right? If something just breaks.
Well, what are you trying to get? Like sources like about legal issues or something?
Like witnesses?
Yeah,
Like
I
what?
guess it's just more to like, I feel like the only information I usually get about crimes comes from the affidavit.
Right.
And that obviously is only one person's perspective. And so I guess just building maybe like if there's victims' rights advocates or
so talk to university professors if you can get them. Those are good if they have like a university with a Department of Justice or criminal justice. In fact, they may talk too much, you know, they're okay, you know, after an hour or something like that. But I bet because they usually should have either a neutral or perspective on something, or they have a lot of background, say there's a law or something or a certain perspective. And if they teach lawyers or something, you know, they're a good source. I've gotten a lot of good information from university professors, and they're always passionate about their topic. Like I said, a lot of times they're too passionate almost.
And kind of, I think we all unfortunately know that sometimes press releases or arrest affidavits, the facts in those aren't always correct. Or there's always another side to that story, right? And so the arrest affidavit will have the address of the, you know, you can find out what block it happened on. So go to the block and knock on doors. Did you see this? I'm a reporter. I'm wondering if what's in this is the kind of like, you know, be transparent about how you do your work. You know, I have the arrest affidavit, and I want to know if what the police are saying jives with what the people here witnessed. Just show up, and if you can't,
that's a really good one.
Yeah, because of COVID or whatever, then there are ways, and you can talk to John Perugia, who's actually on in 7 minutes, doing a workshop on sort of investigative reporting and tools you can use to track people down. So little tips on how to find people who may have been witnesses, right? But yeah, I love that you asked that question. I so urge you to, you know, take that extra step and really find out what other people say happened.
Definitely. I really appreciate that advice. That's definitely something I'm going to incorporate more now.
Good. And if you
guys been hearing,
call me.
I'm sorry. Have you guys been hearing, I think one of the things that's driving me crazy really about sources, particularly from the national media, is that we're starting to have these phrases seep in, and it sounds like they have a source, but they don't, right? For example, some say, and fill in the blank, or people are saying, or I've been hearing, right? And so, you know, a lot of that is starting to seep in, particularly on Fox News. If you ever watch Fox News, there's no sourcing. There's just kind of like, I've heard this, and somebody said this, et cetera. And do you think that's kind of seeping into the more credible outlets as well?
Well, I mean, I think some of that is, you know, we have to remember what's punditry and what's reporting. Yeah. What are the differences sometimes between, you know, certain TV reporting and certain print reporting, but, you know, that shouldn't fly in any newsroom. And we really have to keep steadfast about that. I'm so glad you kept that up. You brought that up, Alfonso.
Yeah.
I have been told, urged that the CPA needs this chat room or the Zoom room at 11:55, and it's 11:55. So I liked this so much better with people, like actually you can see their faces. That was so much more fun. And remember that we at Collab are here anytime you guys want to need a sounding board or anything. So I'll put my email is susan@collab.co, and thank you all and enjoy the conference and see you soon. Okay.